U.S. is shaking up its relationship with Africa by recalling nearly 30 senior diplomats and ambassadors out of countries like Nigeria, Somalia, and Rwanda. The goal is to replace them with people who lean more into the America First strategy. And at the same time, things are getting much tougher for travelers and immigrants as 11 African nations were just added to a restricted list, making it a lot harder to get visas or green cards. Now, on the ground, the U.S. is taking a firmer stance on security issues, especially in Nigeria, but they have made it clear that they are not sending in troops. Instead, they're using diplomatic pressure and direct leader-to-leader phone calls, like a recent one with Liberia's president, to get things done. It's a move away from the old way of doing business towards a more restricted and blunt style of foreign policy. And joining us to make sense of this, we have Alex Vines, his Program Director, Africa-European Council on Foreign Relations in the UK. We also have Dr. Solomon Tai Okajare, Senior Consultant, Institute of Security and Modern War Studies, University of Fortune in Ondo State. And we also have Bolu Michael-Biyi, Foreign Affairs or Foreign Policy Analyst, rather, in Lagos. Dr. Abu Bakarr Bah, Presidential Research Professor of Sociology in Northern Illinois in the U.S., is also joining us at the moment. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. So I would like to begin with Alex. Alex, would love to have your thoughts on this. We're looking at nearly 30 career diplomats, being pulled, with 13 of them in Africa. For a career diplomat to be recalled, not just a political appointee, is a massive break from tradition. What do you think about this? Does this effectively end the idea of a non-partisan U.S. foreign service?
Of change. To be honest, mostly in Africa, there are career diplomats historically from the United States, very few political appointments. South Africa might be one, certainly Egypt might be another, a couple of North African states and a few others. So it's a break of tradition, and it's highly politicizing the American Foreign Service. The Foreign Service Union has already been talking about how demoralized Foreign Service diplomats are in the United States. This is not going to help that situation. And of the 13 countries that have been named for the removal of the career ambassadors or heads of mission, there are a number of countries that are really quite important at the moment for the United States and their bilateral relations, of which Nigeria clearly is a primary one. But I mean, Rwanda's on the list, and there's the Trump attempt to negotiate peace between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, so that's going to be disruptive in the short term. And there's a number of Sahelian states that the United States remains focused on. Niger and Senegal also are going to have their ambassadors removed. Somalia is another one. There are some other smaller states that I don't think anyone necessarily would be quite so perturbed. And a number of other diplomatic missions already just have chargé d'affaires. In fact, the U.S. diplomatic footprint in Africa is looking a lot more like the one that President Tinubu had until recently, which was a lot of chargé d'affaires and not heads of mission globally. That's now changing for the Nigerian administration, but the Trump administration does look like that, particularly in Africa at the moment.
All right, let's hear, Dr. Okajare's thoughts. Let's hear from you, Doctor. Does this effectively end the idea of a non-partisan U.S. foreign service?
Very much. In a way, like Carlos has indicated, I think it's just a way of showing that we are having a very different character in the White House. And somebody who has his own way of driving the foreign policy of the most powerful country in the world. The way things are now, I must say that quite a number of us back in Nigeria are confused as to how and why this should really happen at this time to as many as 13 African countries in one fell swoop. We're looking at it from a lot of dimensions and contexts. Because in the case of Nigeria, a lot of things happened recently. Many street Nigerians were even expecting that at any time the American soldiers would be here on the order of Donald Trump. But that has not taken place, and it will seem that our government is trying to put its house in order so that we avoid that, what would have really amounted like more of I don't know if you are getting me, an insult on our sovereignty. But as it is, we can no longer say that the American system is non-partisan. What is this?
Hello, sir. We can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me.
Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
So it's no longer non-partisan as it were, but we are just trying to look at it. For example, in the case of Nigeria, Richard Mills was just deployed to Nigeria in May this year. And if he's leaving in December or early January, as the instruction came from the State Department, then something is fundamentally strange there. It's, says a lot of things about what the situation may be that is not clear to even the Nigerian government and to the ordinary Nigerians. For those of us in the academia, we are keenly watching to see how this will, pan out eventually.
Okay.
But it's quite strange, really.
Absolutely. We all have our fingers crossed. And let's hear from Bolu. Bolu, with ambassadors in heavyweights like Nigeria and Rwanda being told to pack their bags by January, who is actually running the show now? Are we looking at, months of empty desks while China and Russia move in to fill the silence?
All right, thank you very much for having me, and compliment of the season to you. Yes, it's the charged affairs are the ones that handle the day-to-day operations, in this consulate or embassies, but they don't really have that political influence, don't really have that strong political power. There's only so much they can do when it comes to influencing the politics of the country they are in, or actually making a move that they would like to, as individuals or as experts in the country of assignment. They receive instruction from the United States, from the equivalent of the Foreign Affairs Ministry in the United States, or from the President or the Secretary of State. So they don't really have that political influence. So it creates a vacuum, and it gives opportunity for countries like Russia and China to fill in these diplomatic spaces. We need to understand that the United States created their global influence and power and prestige based on what is called soft power, which involves having their, consulates in countries, providing aid, sponsoring people abroad, providing scholarships and things like that. That's how they build influence and soft power, because who pays the piper is the one that dictates the tune. Diplomacy is all about presence. So when the absence is there, it sends a strong message as well. It's like leaving your shop closed for months, and you now expect your customers not to go to other sellers. That's what's going to happen. The United States has closed its shop in different countries. So countries will look towards Russia, they look towards China, they'll find alternatives, which would make the US even more angry. So I'm really watching keenly how it's going to pan out. But this could be, can actually plunge the United States further into decline in terms of global influence.
All right. Now let's hear from Dr. Bah. Dr. Bah, we've stated here that, in the absence of these ambassadors, the chargé d'affaires would handle the day-to-day activities. But then the State Department says that they want envoys who fully support the president's priorities. Now, tell us, do you think this is a loyalty test that sidelines actual regional practice for political alignment?
Well, but thank you very much first. I think, I think I put this really in context, the recording of X amount of ambassadors. To me, it doesn't really sound like as anything too big or too significant. And I'll tell you why. It's not that of course, in the context of past administrations, this would have been something very big. But if you consider, the approach of the current administration, the way it approaches global affairs, international relations. A lot more actually bigger things have happened. So in my mind, I mean, this is actually just one small piece within that grand scheme. I think overall, I think what we know is that, I mean, this is a administration that does things quite differently. Now, one can agree or disagree with them, but essentially, I mean, they are unpending a lot of the traditional ways of doing things. I think for me, so this really comes with challenges for Africa. But also it comes with opportunities. I think for me, the most interesting question really here is what kind of opportunities actually emerges here for African countries in terms of how they can, I guess, reset their international relations and what kind of things that they need to do, to actually, I guess, benefit from the emerging situations as opposed to really worrying so much about things that you cannot really control. I mean, what the United States does is what the United States does. So I think African countries should be focused on really what they should be doing.
All right, gentlemen, I'm being told that we need to go on a quick break, but we will be back in a bit to continue this conversation. Please stay. Thank you for staying with us. We're still talking about the U.S. pulling its ambassadors and diplomats from African countries. Just before the break, we still have Alex Vines, Dr. Solomon Tai Okajare, Bolu Michael-Biyi, and Dr. Abu Bakarr Bah still with us speaking on this. Now let's come to you, Alex. Alex, the list of restricted countries just grew, by 15, and 11 of those are African countries. So when we talk about, countries like Angola and Malawi, what is the actual security justification here? Or is it, simply a broad brush approach to immigration?
I've just got back from Angola. I was there last week, in fact, and the Angolans are concerned about the Trump administration and its focus on migration. Particularly, the Trump administration is focusing on countries where African nationals or other nationals have had visas. Who overstay them. So that's one issue. A second one is, I'm giving the case of Angola again, is that there are nationals that cross the southern border of the United States and they claim they're Angolan. And the United States is repatriating them to Angola. The Angolan officials themselves say some of them are not necessarily Angolan. They may be other nationalities, but they have the Angolan system is vulnerable for purchasing Angolan or obtaining Angolan passports, and so that's what they're using. Look, you have to look at the national security strategy of the U.S. that's just been released. Much of it is not about Africa at all. It's just like 2 paragraphs right at the end. But migration is really prominent in that document. And so this is a key part of the Make America Great Again MAGA agenda. And this is why countries like Nigeria, like Angola, like Malawi are being indexed, in my view. Different countries are reacting in different ways. The reality in Angola, for example, is that they're trying to downplay some of this and try and work out where they may have good relations with the United States despite this particular irritation. In the Angolan case, because of a strategic corridor for minerals, they're probably going to have a better relationship with the Trump administration, even if, for example, the previous discussion we were just having, there's just a chargé d'affaires in the U.S. embassy in Angola. And I think we'll see a lot more of that across the African continent, because I don't know what my other panelists think, but actually getting political appointments to fill 13 African embassies is not going to be so straightforward for the Trump administration. I don't think there's a long line of people waiting for those types of jobs.
Okay, so let's hear what Dr. Okajare actually thinks about this as well. And in relation to Nigeria, we know that Nigeria is Africa's largest economy, yet it's now facing what some call a visa blockade. With 128,000 visas on the line annually. What do you think about this? Do you think that the U.S. is essentially cutting ties with its most important economic partner on the continent? Dr. Okajare?
Well, I like to say that, yeah, thank you. I like to say that the Nigerian inclusion in that League of States without the American chief missions is an indication that Trump has a new perspective, perhaps opinion, about Africa. And I think right from his first term in the White House, he didn't hide his feeling about Africa and Africans. And that has continued consistently in the second term. In the Nigerian case, the controversies surrounding the Christian genocide issue is a case in point. And then, like you have indicated too, the issue of visa is also there. The allegation of some people who have overstayed their visas, who do not want to come back home and all that, those are issues there. But the only let and breadth of it is that interest is the chief factor in foreign policy and international relations for any country. And so to that extent, one would have expected that the Trump administration would have weighed its options. Because like I think Bolu indicated, there is no way you can entrust the Nigerian-American relationship in its very complex dimensions and intricacies in the hands of chargé d'affaires. These are far junior functionaries who may not have the experience,
capacity.
Even if they have the professional qualification, they may not have the experience to, handle some very, very critical cases. And, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Okay, so to that extent, one would think that the American government should have not applied the broad brush approach. I do know too that whether it is Nigeria or it is Seychelles or it is Niger Republic, there is this blanket mentality that the administration has about Africa. So it doesn't matter whether we are talking of the largest economy in Africa. It doesn't matter whether we are talking of the largest democracy in Africa. What is not right by their perception about Africa is not right about Nigeria. And so it has to be this broad brush perspective. But there is also this other dimension that the government has demonstrated its consistent, preference for America First foreign policy. And that America First foreign policy means that the U.S. is shifting from the traditional setting of providing aid for Africa and coming to business-focused diplomacy. And what that means is that America is now ready to, conduct foreign policy with Africa generally and Nigeria in particular, using any category of officials. We also have to look at the factor of the personal idiosyncrasies of the man at the center.
Okay.
And I think this is going to be there for long until Donald Trump vacates the Oval Office. So as it is now, that is what we have seen. Yes, in our own end of the table, in our own part of the side of the table, we believe Nigeria deserves much more. For example, when the issue of Christian genocide controversy came up, the Nigerian government proactively responded and then deployed some mechanisms, very refined architecture to show some level of responsibility, even if some of us back home believe that the proactive response should have been much, much earlier, but it is better than never.
Let's talk about this Christian genocide.
New response has now been sustained.
Sorry, let's pass that question on Christian genocide to Bolu. Bolu, let's talk about this,
okay.
The CPC status and also Nigeria. We know that the U.S. has labeled Nigeria as a country of particular concern regarding religious freedom.
Yes.
Some think it is about human rights, and others do think that it is a convenient legal hook to justify the new travel restrictions. What do you think?
Well, I think it's both, and I think it's quite strategic when you look at the timing. The CPC status, the country of particular concern status, is it kind of provides a legal basis for everything that Trump is doing, especially targeted towards Nigeria. It justifies sanctions, it justifies the travel limits, or whatever he may want to come up with in future. It's quite unfortunate that they come up with these names as in a cover for a lot of policies that may not be friendly to certain nations, and it kind of promotes a certain agenda that the administration in the U.S. wants to propagate. Even though the human rights concerns are real, but when we look at the application of these policies in terms of enforcement, they look quite selective. They appear to be quite selective in application, which is not fair. That's not what human right is about. Human right covers every human being. So what applies to the goods must apply to Uganda as well. It's like when you suddenly enforce an old rule when you need a reason to penalize someone, it feels a little bit quite retaliatory. Imagine you're in the office and then they come up with a particular rule just to victimize a particular staff or a group of or a particular department. And the funny thing is that the people that make these kind of rules, whether in a nation or in a place of work or whatever, they usually get caught by these rules themselves because they forget along the way, that they made such rules, and I feel in the long run, it might come back to bite the United States in some way. And, we've seen the U.S. president, take a back step on some of his words or policies in the past when he saw that it didn't turn out well. And I think this is one of the things that this is going to fall into that list as well.
All right. Still on a similar question, Dr. Bah, President Trump's recent comments calling Somali immigrants garbage and saying that they should go back to their countries has actually caused outrage. But beyond the shock value, how does this rhetoric impact the thousands of Somali Americans, and also similar countries, those of similar countries who are now worried about their legal status?
So I think, I would just want to say really two things here. I think, the administration, has a certain way of communicating rhetoric and so forth, I think, which, catches the public attention. I think from what I'm seeing around, I think, that generates a lot of varied reactions. But I think to me, the more important point, again, I don't want to underestimate the idea of rhetoric. It is important. Certainly, it is, people feel and so forth. But I think the more important point is about policies. And I think, that really matters more. Because those things actually create legacies beyond an administration, and what we and especially when it comes to immigration, whatever actually it gets instituted actually stays on for a very long time. I think we have to be very clear that there is a current administration. It has a certain policy, and that is kind of like really what it has run on. And this is the American government, right? It is what it is, and it is largely based again on for lack of a better word, an inward-looking kind of United States, wherein it understanding of the United States in terms of internal cohesion is built on certain notion of, identities and membership, and so immigration is part of that. But also externally, it also understands the United States in terms of not necessarily being connected so much to earlier kinds of international, norms of way of doing things, but in a much more different approach, and which to some degree is transactional. So to come back to the really basic question of Somalis or any other group, I think there are two things really I think that needs to be understood. One is the humanitarian aspect of things, that is for people who live here in the United States, and we talk of millions of people. Now, it doesn't really matter what triggers your immigration status, or how did you came here, or why you came here. The bottom line is that if you live here, you have family and so forth, there is a certain level of humanitarian dimension to your stay here. In that sense, and especially when you talk of millions of people. But on a much more broader question, since this now implicates many other countries, especially African countries, I mean, I'm really sorry to say this, but I think these things, the current U.S. policy should really be a good trigger for African countries to think very deeply. They need to think very deeply because essentially all of these speak to African dependency, whether you talk of aid, whether you talk of immigration and so forth. And what generates that dependency, again, I'm sorry to say it is weakness. And that weakness really comes back from poor governance. Again, I know there's a lot of history, there's a lot of complications, but this should really be a trigger for African countries to begin to ask the question about what can we do right, to begin to actually, in a sense, enhance our position in the world. And to do that, you actually have to fix some things internally. So I think I'm less really worried or less concerned really about the policies of the United States, which, it can do what it wants. I mean, that's for the American people to decide. But again, it is incumbent for the African people of African countries or the country to think, well, what can you do in the context and how can you actually address your problems? And again, position yourself better. If you have leverage in international relations, you will always get advantage. If you're weak, you will actually be on the receiving side of things. International relations and geopolitics is not about kindness. I know there's norms and so forth, but deep down, really, it is about power and interest, and they are applied by people who have them.
Okay, now let's talk about the shift to transactional diplomacy, and this is for Alex. Alex, recently we saw a rare phone call between Trump and Liberia's President Bakarr. Is this the new blueprint? Forget the embassies and the statecraft. Is it now just about whether a specific leader stays on the good side of the president?
Well, being on the good side of the president can be one day and then President Trump changes his mind.
The next day.
But I would agree that we're in an era of a la carteism. So the United States is choosing which partners it is more interested in on the African continent. So it's looking at where are there minerals that it wants, what does it define as its kind of key interests. And so if you've got a rich mineral endowment, and that of course includes Liberia, then you become more interesting. And so I think we see some of that diplomacy. It's not by coincidence that the Liberian president earlier this year was invited for lunch with some other African presidents at the White House. That was partly to do with US interests, and it was partly to do with things that we just can't predict with the Trump administration. So the former president of Guinea-Bissau was invited to the Trump lunch, from my understanding, because he had sat next to Mr. Trump at the opening of the Notre Dame Cathedral when it was reopened in Paris. Simple as that, not to do with minerals and other things. So it can be quite difficult to kind of measure how these things work. But as Abu Bakarr said, I do think this is also an opportunity for African countries to work out what are their priority relationships. How do they manage having many suitors now, of which the United States in some countries is one, but you've got the Gulf states, you've got China, you've got Russia. I'm seeing a lot more activity of African diplomacy in Europe at the moment. Partly also because the United States is seen now as very unpredictable. And so a number of European countries and the European Union carry a higher degree of predictability. So the world is changing, but this is an opportunity, I think, for Africa to more tightly define what is its interests and how to handle a increasingly unpredictable United States.
Absolutely. So, gentlemen, we'll take a quick break and we will be back shortly. Please stay with us. Okay, so we're at the home stretch and we're still talking about the U.S.-Africa relations. Still have our guests with us. Let's move on to the next. Just before we wrap up, let's hear from you guys. Let's hear from Dr. Okajare. Dr. Okajare, there's a lot of talk about visa overstay rates. For example, Gabon's 17.7% rate for students. So would you say it is fair to punish an entire nation's travel status based on a few hundred people overstaying a visa?
It's not fair because that percentage does not add up to the entire number of legitimate Gabonese whom I want to, relate with the American society, whether now or in the future. And more importantly, the depth and intensity of economic relationship between Gabon and the U.S. is far greater than that, number of people who are following the rules in America. I admit that it's absolutely wrong for any Gabonese or any African for that matter to, stay more than they are allowed to stay by the American law in the American system or society. But the fact still remains that when you now throw away the baby with the bathwater, it becomes very, very dangerous. Because America and Africa have come a very long way. And America and each of African countries have come a very long way. It's not fair. For me, it's not fair. It's a policy that, should be revisited if it is possible. But I do agree with Abu Bakarr that in international relations and even the trust of foreign policy, when you have the power, you use it to advance your interest. And the American interest has changed now. It has more than ever before affirmed that Africa is at the periphery of the American foreign policy priority. And to that extent, I like to say yes, it has happened to us, it has happened to Gabon, it has happened to Nigeria, it has happened to many African countries in this instance. It's a call and a very clear signal that we must look inward to grow our system and protect ourselves, because the world is actually changing. If I may borrow the utterance or the words of Alex, the world is changing, and Africa must change with it. But to your question, for me, it is not fair. It's not fair.
Well, I believe that Africa will definitely change soon. Now, Bolu, this is quite an interesting one, looking at the 2026 World Cup, which is being hosted in the U.S. We have countries that qualified, like Senegal, that are now on the restricted list. So how can the U.S. host a global stage while actively barring the players and fans of the teams invited?
Yeah, it's a really funny contradiction, because it's like hosting a party but blocking the invited guests at the gate. Luckily, it's not only United States hosting. There's also Canada and Mexico, hosting the World Cup as well. And it simply means that those are the countries that make more sales in terms of tickets, enjoy the benefits of tourism, and have the benefits of additional employment. Can be hosting a global event like this and not be open, and having selective access is a huge contradiction. We should expect some level of diplomacy and sporting backlash from the football fans and also even FIFA and all that. But the United States can still kind of manage this by copying the Morocco model. Morocco is hosting the AFCON 2025 right now, but they have a special visa category, that allows people to come in freely on that particular sporting visa, which expires, I think, a day or 3 or 2 days after the event. They could borrow that label as well. It's not about blocking people. It's not about blocking people from coming in. It should be more about strengthening their own security apparatus, ensuring that they have the capacity to manage the crowd, the capacity to trace people, and to be able to pin down crime. That's what should matter. People can come in as much as they want, but have a system that actually works. So it's a sort of an excuse it could be an excuse for the weak system of the United States in some of these countries, or the fear that, they won't be able to track people that run away and all that. But hosting a party, hosting an event, and blocking the guests at the gate is really funny, and it's a glaring contradiction.
Okay, so let's start taking your final thoughts. So we'll begin with Dr. Bah. Dr. Bah, looking at the January 2026 deadline, are we witnessing a temporary friction or the bridge between the U.S. and Africa being dismantled for good? Let's have your final thoughts.
Well, things have really shaken a lot. A lot of fundamentals have changed within the United States and also within the global system. So I think that's the reality that we do have. here. I really don't know. I don't really think there's much that actually African countries can do about what the United States does, because mostly what is actually happening in the United States is driven by internal, political logic. It is not based on external factors. And again, that's a different conversation. But there's a lot of actually things that are happening in the United States domestically that is actually driving these kinds of politics. So, it is really beyond, even if African countries actually had serious leverage in the international system, it is still beyond their ability to actually influence things here. Now, African countries are on the receiving end of what happens in the United States, meaning that in terms of, going back to the older system, generous immigration policies, generous aid policies, security interventions, and so forth and so forth. Africa has been on the receiving end of those things. In many ways, I think a lot of those things did have like positive, immediate or short-term humanitarian kind of benefits. But in the long run, most of those things haven't really helped Africa in any significant way. And this is really where I want African countries, beginning with African leaders and those who aspire to be leaders, and actually African publics, to really be thinking very, very much more critically. That the only way you can actually address these things is by enhancing your own capacity. And to enhance your own capacity, you actually have to begin with your own governance. It's a monumental task. It's a lot. But somehow, again, this, the impending of international relation and the aid regime and the, Africa's kind of like connection to the United States and the West in some ways, the impending of that, again, is an opportunity. Africa has to use that wisely and honestly. So I will just say to my African brothers and sisters and leaders, please wise up.
Okay, and let's hear final thoughts, Alex Vines.
Yeah, I think the Trump administration will be more engaged in the African continent, but as Abu Bakarr said, a lot of the drivers are domestic, so even the allegations of that the Nigerian government isn't doing enough to protect Christian communities, the roots of that are domestic politics, including already warming up who might succeed on Mr. Trump, the ambitions of Ted Cruz and so on. So domestic American politics really drives some of these decisions. But we do see a real uptick now of certain types of U.S. investment. In the last 2 weeks, there's been $754 million invested in the Lobito corridor in Angola, and then memorandum signed in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in the last couple of days, the Americans have unlocked, I think it's 8 or 9 agreements for health partnerships on the African continent. They have been reframed, and we can also see that the African Growth and Opportunity Act is going to be extended, if not repurposed. So there's a lot more America first in this, but it isn't actually going to be in 2026 that the US is retreating from Africa, but it is going to be a different type of US engagement. And as Abu Bakarr said, African leaders will need to wise up and be very shrewd on how they manage that and what opportunities they can work around it.
All right, thank you so much for that. Dr. Okajare, let's have your final thoughts. Alex and Abu Bakarr have said Africa needs to wise up.
Africa should wise up on the basis that what has happened now is a clear signal that African leaders and people may have to look elsewhere, because there has been this controversy surrounding China, Russia, and so on as contenders with America in the whole of Africa. So as one, I think Gene Schmidt said recently, that Donald Trump has opened the door to the American rivals, particularly China and Russia. How can African leaders now leverage on that and make the best of it? The best thing now is to look at the binary realities we have had. Our old friend, America, has come up to say XYZ. Now, our new friends who are even begging to really come and take charge. We can embrace them, but we must also embrace them with caution. Because for whatever it is in international relations, there's no free lunch. Thank you.
All right, let's finally hear from you, Bolu.
All right. So I don't really align with Africa looking elsewhere. I align with Africa looking inward, because whatever America or Europe or whatever they are today, perennially could be. This was built by Africans taking away there to build those countries. If they could build the country, they could develop the infrastructure of these countries and actually create a kind of society that we can do the same inward. Africans are hardworking people. We're unique people, so we should begin to look inward and not borrow context from abroad and try to domesticate them and all that. We should actually do things within our context. We also must learn the art of playing international politics. Africa on the global stage has been perennially weak when it comes to foreign policy and actually engaging with these world powers. We're still clamoring for a seat, in the UN Security Council and things like that. We must learn the art of negotiation, striking deals, and we can see that it's possible when we look at the structure of the AES states. They're actually growing, they're actually making progress and improving all around. So there's a point that a child has to grow and wean himself from the breast, and I think Africa is now becoming a big baby. We have all the resources, we have the raw materials, we have the manpower. Let us begin to put them into use right now and beginning to understand how international politics works, begin to use our soft power and actually put ourselves in the center of world politics. And when we can do that, I believe strongly that Africa will gain its place in the world. Thank you.
All right, well, this is where we wrap up this conversation. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Alex Vines, Program Director, Africa-European Council and Foreign Relations. We also had Dr. Solomon Tai Okajare, Senior Consultant, Institute of Security and Modern War Studies, University of Fortune, in Ondo State, and also Bolu Michael-Biyi, Foreign Policy Analyst in Lagos, and Dr. Abu Bakarr Bah, Presidential Research Professor of Sociology, Northern Illinois University in the U.S. Thank you so much once again, gentlemen.